When will grown, educated professionals stand up and say, this is ridiculous. This is not good for children or teachers. The institution is here for our sake. We are not here for the institution's sake, for data's sake. And I cannot comply with your absurdity and inhumanity anymore.
Bueno, bienvenida, Angelina, ¿cómo estás?
Excellent, thank you for having me.
Angelina Sáenz, maestra, now doctora, right? We're going to talk
In
about
the
that.
process,
I know,
yeah.
doctora in the
Yeah,
process,
yeah.
but we definitely have to talk about that. And whose first book, we're also pressmates, which makes it even extra special. So, but I knew you before we were pressmates with FlowerSong Press. Let us know about you, how you came into poetry. I know that you came into poetry a little later.
Well, I grew up in LA, specifically in Silver Lake. It's not the Silver Lake of today. The Silver Lake of the 70s through the 90s was very mixed economically, and a lot of extremes. So where I lived, most of the mothers were on welfare, single mothers, and we were all latchkey kids. And it was during the Reagan era also, and it was also during the Central American, like the war in El Salvador, all the civil wars in Central America. So there was a huge influx of Central American immigrants. So you put all the poor kids together, you put refugees together, and you leave us alone, and we're gonna be up to no good. So I would say the 70s and 80s were what you could expect under those circumstances. There was a lot of mental health challenges in families, and I grew up with a lot of violence, a lot of abuse, and I was a failing student my whole life, and a lot of people were murdered, incarcerated, addicts, and a lot of people were dying from HIV around us. A lot of trauma. So I did drop out of high school, and at the same time, my brother got out of jail and took a Chicano studies class and brought the book home. So I consider myself a delinquent nerd. I was always naughty, but I read a lot.
Do you remember the name of the book that he brought?
Yeah, Occupied America.
Okay.
So he brought home Occupied America. I read it in 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
And then, and this was at the point where I was dropping out. My mother was dying from alcoholism. My brother had just gotten out of jail. And I was living in Hollywood my neighbors were prostitutes and pimps and addicts. And I read Occupied America. And I realized why we were in the situation that we were in. It was the first time I identified as a Chicana, when I understood what that identification was. And I decided I wasn't going to go down that way. So I took the California proficiency test. I passed it, and I enrolled in community college at 17. And then went to school for 8 years. I did community college for 4, undergrad for 4.
Where'd you go to undergrad?
I went to East LA College, and then I transferred to Occidental, and then decided to go into teaching. And the first school I taught at was in Echo Park. And a lot of the kids were the children of the people that I grew up with. So when my old buddies that I hadn't seen in a while showed up with their kids, they were like, oh, whose TA are you? And I was like, no, I'm a teacher. And they were like, how? You're supposed to be dead or on drugs or in jail.
Right.
Like, how are you a teacher?
Right.
So then their children were in my care, and I remembered what I had gone through in school, and I felt really committed to building a relationship with them, making sure that they felt good in my classroom, and having super high expectations, and doing whatever it took to make sure that they moved along academically. So I am a mother. I have 2 children who went through LA Unified up until 5th grade. And I still live in LA. And then poetry, I'm sorry, amiga. So I've written poetry since I was a teenager. It was private, I kept it to myself. In college, I would submit to the college, you know.
The literary magazine.
Yeah, the college magazine, whatever. And then I started teaching, and I just kept writing poetry privately for myself. Then I got divorced during my midlife crisis. Thank you, midlife crisis. And decided, what am I going to do now that I'm free and alone? And going back to do a master's in writing was what I did. And then that was 2016.
That was at Otis, right?
That was at Otis. And then I started
Bridget
writing
Bianca,
again.
Also, who we interviewed.
That's where I met Bridget Bianca, my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were definitely in good company. You two were definitely. And that's how I met. That's how I met her. It was through you, actually. You hosted something in La Palabra, and she was part of your lineup. So that's one of the first times I remember like hearing her name and hearing her work. Your upbringing comes up a lot in Edgecliff, which was your first collection. All the things that you were talking about, your neighbors and your upbringing and your mother, all of that comes up. And then in this new collection, again by FlowerSong Press, Maestra, the title alone tells us what the focus might be. Having read Edgecliff and having read Maestra, I'm really curious what really sparked for you to say, hey, I'm going to put this down in a manuscript. Like I'm going to put all these poems. And also, I know when you're retired from teaching, how many years were you teaching at LAUSD?
I taught in LAUSD for 23 years. But if you add my TA time, then it was about 25, 26 years.
So this collection spans, and I'm curious about this, like spans how many years?
Definitely 23 years.
Okay, 23 years.
Yeah.
So the poems are truly like
They go back to the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm curious if you had to switch certain gears. When you wrote Edgecliff, you had to be in a certain space and using certain tools. Did you have to use different tools? Did you have to go to a different place when you wrote Maestra? Or do you feel that the gears were basically the same?
All of the poems for Edgecliff were written. I just have them everywhere on pieces of paper in a million files. And so for Edgecliff, I gathered everything. And it was the first poetry book I had ever written. I didn't know what I was doing. And so figuring out the architecture and which poems I was going to have and what I was trying to do. Edgecliff was like a kind of I don't know what that's called, like when your world breaks down. Like I just was transformed in the process of doing Edgecliff. So that's that. But they were all written. I just had to gather them all. And then Maestra, I had like 300 teaching poems.
Oh, wow.
Already written.
Wow.
So I just had to go find them, which I did again. All of my books, I just have to go find them. My poems are everywhere. And so the work was to gather them all in one place and then to try to find the themes, like, and what did I want to say about it, and then decide what I wanted to cut out. And as you know, it's so hard.
It is.
Because I think I'm down to 70 poems in this book. And so therefore I left out like 230 poems. Yeah, it was literally huge.
So what, that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
So what do you do with those 230? Are they in this ether? What, do you plan to do something with these 230 or?
I have another file now called Mas Maestra.
Okay.
Or Post Maestra, I haven't decided. But that's all the poems that were left out, but poems I continue to write. Because I did leave teaching 2 years ago. And now I'm a staff developer, so I teach teachers. And from that is coming a whole other series of poems about my experience in working with teachers and schools and having conversations about what's instructionally important for students and families.
And so you talked about right now how organizing the book. And so I noticed that there was divisions, right, or certain categories. Can you talk about those categories?
Yeah. So the first section is called Vocecitos. And those are the voices of the children, and it's adorable to me. And that section really captures the humanity of children. In some ways, we can just show up to our classroom and feel like we're just feeding them, like Paulo Freire talks about the banking method. So they're these empty vessels and we're filling them up. And Vocecitos really challenges it as they're people like us.
Absolutely.
And they have feelings and they have needs. And they're, even at the age of 5-year-old, trying to figure out how to navigate being in an institution. And so that's what Vocecitos is, giving them their voice.
Did you only teach kindergarteners, it sounds like?
I taught elementary.
Okay.
So K1, 2, and 5. Those were the grades that I taught.
Okay. And it was
so the poems are
subject.
all of those grade levels.
Gotcha.
All subjects. Teacher says, don't know how to tie shoes? Then wear slip-ons or Velcro. I have too many kids to be tying shoes all day long. I tell my mom I need slip-ons or Velcro, and she sends me to school with laces again. I walk around all day with my shoes untied. Sometimes I tuck them in on the side. Kevin, mute yourself. No, turn off your mic. Where is your mom or dad? Okay, I'm putting you in the waiting room. Mom calls on Google phone. Señora Sáenz, my 5-year-old is in the waiting room. That is correct. You need to supervise him because he is turning his mic on and off, making faces and interrupting my lesson. Let me know when you do that and I'll admit him back in.
The first poem about shoelaces, that's, again, that's real, right? It's like I need, teachers want things to be a bit more convenient. It's like just put Velcro on, especially when there's this little. And then the mom just decides to give them shoelaces anyway. So, I mean, how do you interpret that? How did you interpret that moment by the parent who still decided to just?
My whole career where children's needs were not being met definitely reflected whatever the challenges were that were going on at home. One of the poems in there is about me writing to a parent and saying, your kid hasn't returned their books from reading, from taking them home, and if you don't return them, you're going to pay me $15 for each lost book. And what I remember is if my mom would have received that. She was a single mom, she was a waitress, she was illiterate, she was an immigrant, she was disabled, and a note like that would have gone in one ear and out the other. She was just in survival mode. Not to say that all of our parents are like that, but there's a lot of things that the teacher wants from the student and doesn't take into consideration there's a whole world beyond them.
Right.
And they can't control those things. And so our response to the outcomes that we're getting that we don't like, if it's negative, it's just compounding whatever the problem is.
So it seems like the book, especially Vocitos, isn't just giving voice to the kids and the students, but also the teacher and also the families.
Yeah.
So that whole section really is 3 voices, really, it sounds like, or it seems like. When I read it, too, I was like, oh, this isn't just the kid's perspective, this is the teacher's perspective, this is the parent's perspective, and also your own experience, right? Because like you said, your mom, right? And I definitely did see that in that poem. So Vocitos is the first section.
So Vocecitos, then there's parents.
Vocecitos.
And those were poems that I wrote based on conversations with parents. And then there is a section on teachers and just writing poems about teachers. Then there is the section on the strike. LA Unified had a 12-day strike. And what my experience, and I was writing poems through the strike, so those are the poems from that time. And then there is a section on COVID, Crazy Town.
Yeah.
And I have to say, COVID broke me. So after COVID, the next section of poems is about policy.
Right.
And I don't see, unfortunately, any common sense or wisdom or sincerity on the part of the bureaucracy to really humanize the teaching learning experience so that people can get to a better brain place to really help students learn.
What do you feel is like, and there's many problems, I'm not going to say there's any, but if you had to choose, what do you think is the most, what is the thing, arguably the thing that needs to be fixed?
If we ask ourselves, what do I need to be in the best place for my life? I need to be loved. I need to be welcomed. If you think of Maslow's, right, self-actualization, there is a hierarchy of needs. And if you think about, I need the resources to be able to fulfill whatever role I'm playing. And when we think about teachers, you know, printers aren't working. You can't run somewhere at recess or lunch to make copies. We don't have teacher assistants. Literally, central air systems don't work. So you're either dying of heat or you're freezing. And I'm not exaggerating. Like the conditions in public schools for teachers and for students is not conducive to them feeling comfortable to be ready to teach and to learn.
And on the flip side to that, what do you think is actually working well, if anything?
Because I work with teachers, it is amazing to me that with the little that they have, they show up every day and they try to make something out of nothing.
Yeah.
So teachers blow my mind. And I have to say, even the bad teachers, because there are bad teachers. There are teachers who hurt children with the way that they behave.
Right.
And even those teachers still show up. I mean, they're making, you know, they have classrooms where students feel very uncomfortable because they're mean to them and they're racist and etc. They still show up though, and there's a little bit of stability. At least they know they're coming to the grouchy, mean teacher every day. There's some stability there. But what's going right is that teachers keep showing up and that families keep sending their children to
Why
school.
do you think they keep showing up if everything, you know, everything else is falling apart? Why do you think that keeps us? I mean, because
they're really teachers. I'm serious. You can't stay there. You can't do that job if your heart is not in it. And when I talk to teachers, they are natural teachers. Their heart is in it. And they'll go home and cut felt hearts that no one is paying them to do, right? And teachers are underpaid. If you think about cost of living in LA.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Horrible.
Absolutely.
So nonetheless, these folks, you know, show up early, they stay after school, they take work home, they're communicating with parents. Most of them are life affirming, family affirming, kid affirming. And if they're not, it's because they're exhausted, like any parent would be who has 24 children, right?
Yeah.
So I think the teachers and the children are what's working.
Oh. There is a dedication, right, to the craft. And it is a craft, right? It is not just a job.
I did not leave because of students and parents. I can be with them all day long. I love students and parents. I could not deal with business as usual after COVID.
Yeah.
And I cannot deal with the amount of standardized computer testing that they're putting children through and having teachers administer to 5-year-old children. God bless the people who can negotiate how that makes them feel. It was making me very angry. And for my own sake, I had to go. I just couldn't accept it anymore. I think we're on candid camera. An experiment in compliance and authority. The research question, when will grown, educated professionals stand up and say, this is ridiculous. This is not good for children or teachers. The institution is here for our sake. We are not here for the institution's sake, for data's sake. And I cannot comply with your absurdity and inhumanity anymore. The experiment continues, the pile gets higher, the clock is ticking, and we allow the circus to go on.
I actually wanted to ask you to read a poem from Huelga, the strike.
Soaking wet from picketing in 10 hours of rain. Would Dolores Huerta have walked into her house with 2 large Little Caesars pizzas for her children, requesting they sort themselves out for the evening after they sorted themselves out for the day? I kick off my muddy boots, peel wet clothes off of my skin, slip into lavender bath, crawl into soft bed at 7 p.m. to sleep until the next morning. Como lo hicieron las madres campesinas.
When I heard that you were leaving your profession, that was a big deal. When you announced you were leaving, I was genuinely surprised. And I thought about all those families that you changed, like the lives that you changed, I mean, over these years. To be at your poetry readings and to see former students of yours, you know, stand there and share their own work, everything comes back full circle. And to see and to hear from them how much you've changed their lives. And I hope that you know that. I hope you feel that. The next step, then you just announced recently that you're about to start a PhD program. So you're not done with school. So where did that come from? Did you always want it to, was that always going to be the next step for you after, you know, retiring from teaching?
This particular PhD program is a program that examines the philosophy of, the educational philosophy of the 3 Buddhist leaders who founded my Buddhist organization. So it's Soka Gakkai International, and that's the Buddhist organization, and it was started by teachers in the 1930s. So the main founder, Makaguchi, wrote a book called Value Creation Education, and that book is very similar to Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's very surprising. As I read it, I was like, oh my God, this was written in 1930, and Paulo Freire wrote, you know, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, I think in the 80s. So,
and that's someone, by the way, that you dedicated the book to.
Exactly.
I noticed that.
Yeah, to one of the Buddhist, to one of the founders of the organization. So the program studies the educational philosophy. It's called Soka Education. And the schools that exist around the world. There's Soka University in Orange County. Those of us who practice this Buddhism have a very particular way of living and philosophy that mostly is about us taking responsibility for our lives and transcending all differences. And so I figured I could do this and not be miserable and not be fighting with my faculty. And this is, and there's not very many educational philosophies that I believe in. And so this is one of them that I do.
I think this new collection is different than Edgecliff. There is a different voice. There's a different perspective. One of the ways that I do see similarity is that they're both political statements, right? They're both political statements, and they're both giving voices to people who you've met, people who are still alive with us today, some who have transitioned. But I feel that they're both still political statements of systems that have let people down, right? You know, various systems that let people down, educational system, and also the systems when you were living in, you know, Edgecliff, the systems that were not there to support and provide resources for the mothers and for the fathers and for mental health resources. As a poet, I admire you for that. You're honest, you're witty. And I know always that when I go to see you read that we're going to get truth. And you're going to get truth with love, though. You give us truth with a smile, and that's always, I think that's a true reflection of who you are, and really embodies your work. And so I'm really super excited about this collection. And the artwork, give a shout out to your artist, please.
So Lorna Alcana is the illustrator. In 2017, she created a zine. And she created a zine with my social media posts and my poetry.
Wow.
And so when Edgecliff came out, I asked her if she wanted to do the same, which she did. And so for Maestra, she went through my social media and found all my posts about teaching and picked some that goes with the poems and illustrated it and included the captions from those posts.
she does really a phenomenal job of capturing
Yes.
the essence of the poems and the essence of the books with the book covers. But anyway, I want to say thank you so much. This was such an awesome interview. I learned a lot. I think we all learned a lot. And now I'm going to read so many of the books that you mentioned today.
Yeah.
So I need to go look them up. I need to, dive into it. But thank you.
Yes.
Felicidades otra
Thank
vez.
you so
Gracias.
much. Thank you.
Gracias.